Layered Insight is the industry's first embedded security approach for containers. Trusted by Global 1000 enterprises to secure their containerized applications, it's the only solution that requires no root privileges, has zero dependency on the underlying infrastructure, and is fully portable across any container environment. Unify DevOps and SecOps, enabling the rapid development of containerized applications without worrying about security. To learn more, please visit layeredinsight.com/ASW. Innovation's a funny thing, in a cosmic sort of way. While it drives your business forward, it also exposes new risks that can slow you down. As an IT or security professional, every day you need to know, are you vulnerable? Are you compromised? And finally, are you optimized to quickly spot and resolve issues to keep your operation humming? It's your responsibility to help the organization safely and reliably implement the latest connected technologies. So how can you outsmart this little paradox? Rapid7 solutions are powered by advanced analytics and an unmatched understanding of the attacker's mindset. Visit rapid7.com to learn more about how Rapid7 products transform data into action. Signal Sciences is the industry's first web protection platform that works in any cloud, any container, any platform as a service, and any modern application architecture. The Signal Sciences web protection platform can be deployed in next-generation WAF, RASP, or reverse proxy modes, giving customers ultimate flexibility and coverage. Protect your web applications with Signal Sciences web protection platform. Signal Sciences, protecting applications, connecting teams. For more information, check them out at signalsciences.com/PSW.
Welcome back, everyone, to Application Security Weekly. A couple of quick announcements for this segment as well. We've recently added the State of Security Education and Training webcast in conjunction with IT Pro TV and Roger Williams University to our content. So it's available on demand at securityweekly.com/on-demand. It's free for our Security Weekly listeners and subscribers. And be sure to just check out the State of Penetration Testing with Black Hills Information Security. The guys over at BHIS are incredible, so I definitely recommend that one strongly. Two other announcements, actually, real quick. BugCrowd is hiring, so check out bugcrowd.com/careers or email me hoodie@securityweekly.com. I can tell you more information on any positions you might be interested in. Lastly, if you're looking to hire either junior or senior penetration testing talent, let me know. The DEF CON 617 group meets the first Tuesday of every month in Boston. And so I've met a number of people there who are looking for some new opportunities, and I'd be happy to connect you if you're looking to hire. Again, hoodie@securityweekly.com. With that, let's go ahead and jump into the news for this week. So the one that I thought was the most hilarious, because earlier, Paul, you were talking about operating systems and having bash, is Debian has a CVE 2018-0492, where there's a race condition in Beep that, if you can hit the race condition, allows you to get local privilege escalation. What do you think, Paul?
That's pretty awesome.
Your computer for VESC. It's like, I know that, if you hold down a key for too long, your computer starts beeping at you, but privilege escalation with Beep? What?
That's awesome. It's awesome. It's one of those binaries you could probably safely delete too. Right?
Yeah, I don't think that there's any mission critical. Well, you say that, Paul, but it could be one of those situations where your computer is, going to force shut down, and it needs to make sure, like, there's a logical check that Beep takes place before you actually have the power off, kill command go through. So who knows? I don't know that I would recommend deleting it.
The Beep functionality must also exist in the BIOS and or hardware-based firmware UEFI as well, right? Because it'll beep before the bootloader comes up and loads the kernel. So I don't know if the operating system command actually accesses it must access the hardware to make it beep, right? Because that sound has to come from the motherboard.
Right. So needless to say, Debian for old stable distribution, which is Jessie, it's been fixed in 1.3-3 Deb 8U1. And then for the stretch distribution, it's been patched in 1.3-4 Deb 9U1. So it is patched. Get you to the patchery so that your beep doesn't cause local priv-esc.
It's awesome.
I just thought that was hilarious. APFS encrypted plaintext passwords, story number 2 under the bugs, breaches, and more section. Apparently, High Sierra continues to have a treasure trove of really bad practices. So another more persistent macOS log file is storing plaintext passwords to system logs.
So this is another vulnerability in Apple's encrypted file system. The implementation of it. Yeah.
You know what has seemed to have happened, Paul, is you cover WordPress a lot, or at least you have in the past covered WordPress a lot on Paul Security Weekly. I feel like on Application Security Weekly, almost every episode we have seen has had an Apple High Sierra vulnerability.
Right.
I just can't fathom this at this point. It's like, what is wrong with Apple? Yeah, needless to say, the original patch for the last APFS encryption vulnerability was supposed to be patched in 10.13.2. This is in the most recent patch, which I think is 10.13.3, and it actually has existed in terms of a vulnerability with entries dating back to original installs of High Sierra in November of 2017. WTF. Like, this is the reasons I have not upgraded to High Sierra. They just keep piling on. Like, at this point, I am probably going to be waiting until the next major release, and then still be waiting like 6 months or more before I decide to install.
I mean,
you're not using too. Go ahead.
Well, one could speculate that something changed in Apple's software development process that has led to either a bunch of code not being checked for security vulnerabilities, or security vulnerabilities just being introduced and again not checking for those vulnerabilities in the SDLC, which is kind of concerning.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the other side of it too that could be happening here, Paul, is that it could be a situation where people are now taking a harder look at macOS as opposed to otherwise, and so now they're looking at High Sierra just because it's the latest, and so more things are popping out. It makes me wonder though, because Apple has a really good reputation of providing and making secure mobile devices, and I can't imagine that their operating system is really this bad. But I don't know. Maybe we should get Patrick Wardle on the show to talk about this. He has ObjectivesT.com, which he's pretty well known for some of the tools that he has built that are free and open source for securing macOS, and quite frankly, also finding vulnerabilities in macOS.
Yep.
So Patrick, if you're listening, we want you on the show. Reach out. We will get you on for an interview. Moving on, Drupal, also all bad. A highly critical CMS bug has left over 1 million sites open to attack, affecting Drupal 6, 7, and 8, which effectively is sites running vulnerable versions of Drupal should be updated to 7.5.8, because in this case, it would allow for, let's see, what was it here? Social media has called this Drupal 2, and it allows for people to actually exploit multiple attack vectors. They haven't even specified which one, but apparently all bad with Drupal. I don't know, Paul, CMS, it sounds like this process is hard. I know that you run multiple websites. What do you think?
Your choices are kind of like pick your poison. And none of the CMS frameworks have a really stellar reputation for not containing security vulnerabilities. They also make it very easy to introduce vulnerabilities into the system as well. I don't know what the right answer for that is. A lot of them are, well, they're in the core code. A lot of them are in the plugin or add-on code, and there's just so many moving parts. It makes it a very difficult technology to apply security. And if we look back over time, there was movable type and, God forbid, Cold Fusion, and then Drupal and WordPress, and they've all, over the years, we've covered so many vulnerabilities in these frameworks that, if you're implementing them today, being agile in your deployment, and certainly having a DevOps process around them, I've come to discover is where I'm heading, and I think a lot of people should already be at that level when you're deploying a CMS. And we talked last week about WP Engine, right? And I think that you're going to choose a technology based on your needs, and you're going to apply security in that process. And I think that a DevOps style approach is absolutely needed, because you're going to need to push out changes, not just for functionality, but for security as well, like at a high rate. So, having that process built around your CMS where you can do 10 deploys a day totally makes sense. You don't want to be in a situation, whatever CMS you've chosen, where it takes 6 months to push out an update. That's going to lead to disaster, because there's always going to be new security vulnerabilities. And then, of course, it's the whole monitoring piece on top of that, which I've never found anything that I was really excited about for monitoring. There are some things for WordPress, that I'm looking into, But monitoring that ecosystem has always been challenging for me.
Yeah, and it's a situation now where hopefully being able to do things like containerizing some of these applications will at least give you a backstop against attacks, right? So maybe they do get into the CMS system. You have to still deal with potential client-side attacks against like other users on your site.
Mm-hmm.
But to that end, at least you can perhaps harden it so that they don't get access to things like the database. Heaven forbid, right? So that was CVE 2018-7600. If you need more information on that. Also, I just wanted to cover in the last two in the bugs, breaches, and more section, which is first, I know that a few weeks ago we talked about how Microsoft had some patch issues related to what was Meltdown for Windows 7 x64 and Windows Server 2008 R2 x64 system. Looks like they've actually pushed that out as an update for CVE 2018-1038. So what the patch was, that was effectively supposed to patch Meltdown, ended up doing was it allowed for exploitation as just a matter of reading and writing already mapped processes in virtual memory. It allowed any process running on the system to read complete contents in memory. So effectively, the way that they patched Meltdown and Spectre was rather just than reading this cached memory section based on speculative execution, why don't we just let them read all memory, regardless of user privilege on the system? How do you mess up that badly?
I don't know.
Is my kind of question here.
Dude, it's just a hot mess. I mean, there's no better way to describe it than just a flaming hot mess with Spectre and Meltdown. And every week there's new information that comes out. I've lost track about what the original vulnerability was, what new vulnerabilities that the patches are introducing. And last night we covered certain Intel processors that won't get updates, and that was a mess as well because it's not necessarily based on age. Like some of the older processors will get an update, and some that came after won't get an update. There's speculation that some of the processors weren't in widespread distribution, and it's not necessarily based on age, but based on deployment. So the whole thing is just a complete hot mess.
Yeah, in this case, it was a Swedish penetration tester, Ulf Frisk, who found the vulnerability. And he states, this made the page tables available to user mode code in every process. Like,
I know Microsoft, right up your alley, Keith, had a bug bounty for new speculative execution vulnerabilities. Microsoft has a bounty for $250,000, which, I don't know, in the scheme of things, that seems like one of the higher payouts for a bug, although you know better than anyone, right? But in my assessment, that was a pretty high payout. So Microsoft is certainly very interested in ensuring that these bugs are responsibly disclosed and fixed in their code. When it's their code that needs fixing.
Right. I don't know, and it makes me wonder if this would have qualified, right? Because it was actually a fix to a speculative execution bug that introduced effectively read-write any memory on the system bug that was in fact what the patch ended up being.
And I think Microsoft clarified that, and it was like 12 or 25,000 for those variations on attacks. They actually put that in their bug bounty as well. Brand new ones are the big bounty, and then kind of offshoots from existing attacks were a much lower amount.
Yeah, and quite frankly, all of those payment ranges are very high. I mean,
pretty high. Yeah, I say lower amount, like 25 grand, still pretty good, right?
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, so most bug bounty programs, I think the top end for really critical, melting earth bugs are maybe at 10K for their application. But they're also not Microsoft, and they're not running most of the world's software.
Correct, yes.
That's an entirely different set of problems. Speaking of software, though, Paul, under the "if you build it, they will come" story number 1, there is it was just highlighted as a tweet out there that I saw where 45 million downloads for a JavaScript function that someone had open sourced to determine if something is a number, which is already built-in functionality inside of JavaScript. Quite frankly, I think, Paul, this is how the world ends. I remember we had a story a few weeks ago about how someone re-registered a GitHub library after someone had then gone and deleted it in the Go package. It blows my mind. I mean, Paul, you've written a lot of software. Do you tend to look for libraries or functionality that are going to do something that the code can already do for you?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting scenario. And as much as we try and read the documentation for native function calls, in your searching, or maybe someone else, maybe before that functionality was included in the language, or the functionality was somewhat limited in, like, say, Python 2.7, and then, you're going to Python 3, and what you need is in Python 3, but the 2.7 function was somehow limited, so I went off and got a third-party library to do that, and so I can see the situation happening, especially as different iterations of languages occur, and everyone just kind of falling back to what was public before. Maybe now the built-in function has more functionality, and I don't need that, but I'm still using this other third-party library.
And then all of the Stack Overflow suggestions point you to that third-party library,
right.
And then it ends up being the top search on Google, and then everybody just goes and downloads it. And then eventually, when that person deletes that library for some reason or another, like, the world goes to chaos. So
yeah, or that library has
how this happens.
That library has a vulnerability, which is why I like solutions,
right.
That look for vulnerabilities in your code as it's being developed and committed. And there's several vendors out there. I think we've got an interview with WhiteSource coming up on this show. And they're a great vendor in that space. So I'm looking forward to that interview. And there's lots of other vendors in that space. WhiteSource is really good, and actually some of my friends that work in the industry have kind of vouched for them and said, yeah, we use it, and it really helps us. So this is certainly a circumstance where that technology can help kind of get out ahead of the curve with vulnerable libraries.
Absolutely. And even more than that too, right? So, like, if someone has a vulnerable library of this and or deletes it, it causes a lot of chaos. And it makes me wonder, like, in my mind, this is what technical debt looks like.
Yeah.
Like, this is an exact scenario of technical debt where it was paid off by the main language, but that we're also used to just charging it to our Stack Overflow card effectively, that we don't even bother looking for the next level down. So,
yep.
Yeah, it's going to cause problems. Surprising no one, under story number 3 for the If You Build It, They Will Come, criminals are hijacking your computer to mine cryptocurrency. This is probably the most obvious headline that I think I've read ever. But the thing that I found interesting about this story was specifically Egyptian internet users who are accessing a porn site that I will remain nameless for now. It's in the story if you want to go read it. In recent years have found their computer slowing down, and it was speculated that it was because of ads. But in this case, it was actually the Egyptian government was secretly hijacking citizens' computers in mass for those that were going to these porn websites to mine cryptocurrency. I thought that was kind of interesting because it was quite, in this case, a government that was actually doing it, not even like a malicious actor.
Wait, like, there's porn. There's porn on the internet. Just news to me.
Who'd have thought, right?
Who'd have thought, right?
Well, so the other thing that I find interesting though is it was a government that was doing it, and I know that in the Middle East there are a number of laws depending on the country that you're in. Related to, like, unseemly content such as pornography, right? So it makes me wonder if, rather than having it be a situation where those people are getting arrested, they said, well, why don't we just, like, turn this around and monetize
right
by hijacking traffic?
Well, which, I think that that ties into your other story that you had in there about the state of Georgia.
Oh man, yeah, that's a whole nother problem as well.
Right?
So under the food for thought section.
Speaking of legislation.
Yeah, this one is real bad. Basically, Georgia passed anti-information security legislation that, despite the community that's in Georgia, so specifically Atlanta is kind of a hotbed of security talent, the actual legislation that's passed, according to EFF, states that basically if you're looking for vulnerabilities in a non-destructive way, even if you've ethically reported them, and especially if you've ethically reported them, you're suddenly a criminal if the bill actually is signed by the governor of the state. To go on, though, a lecturer at Kennesaw State University, Andy Green, was quoted as saying that he's putting his research on hold because college undergrad students may be open to criminal penalties, and it's basically giving him pause. I can't believe it. We live in a day and age where ethical disclosure is being kind of a normalized thing. I mean, I work for a company that promotes it. And now we have a state who was just hit by a huge ransomware attack.
And this is their reaction.
Yeah, the backlash is incredible. Like, I can't even. I don't have enough evens at this point.
Well, I think
Paul, you have
it's somewhat of an atypical response, that we're seeing a trend. Certainly, Facebook cracking down on ads as they were, reportedly influencing the election. YouTube cracking down on certain types of content, based on shootings and events that have happened, and people blaming technology, right? And then companies and governments reacting to get rid of that technology. It's always been my fear that legislation like this would crop up in our field and say that hacking tools are bad, that looking for vulnerabilities are bad, and we have seen some of that in the past, and it's really kind of frightening.
Yeah, and it's one of those situations that I don't know whether or not the governor has actually signed it into law. I haven't seen anything to that effect, and I'm hoping that they haven't. But to that end, it's weird to me because the DOJ and so many other federal entities have been somewhat permissive of ethical disclosure of vulnerabilities, whether it's through a bug bounty program or disclosing it to the company just as a kind of goodwill disclosure, right? And to take this approach, especially after it might have been a year or two ago now, where doing research against things like cars, right? That was recently permitted. I'm trying to remember if it was the FTC or I can't remember who it was now, but there was a government agency that basically said you're allowed to do research on these things now for a 3-year window, pending renewal. Yes. But to have a state come back and say, yeah, no research, never, and if you do it, you'll be arrested.
I think that my hope is that it doesn't pass, and I think one of those deciding factors are going to be the universities and industry companies that are in the state that are impacted by this, and also not them just complaining loudly. If it does pass, they likely will leave, right? And new companies will not set up shop in Georgia because of this law. So it effectively is going to hit their bottom line in a big way. And we can only hope that the governor is going to figure that out rather quickly, if they haven't already, and not sign this into law. That's my hope, being optimistic.
I agree. And, unfortunately, I think, though, that especially with the situation as it stands in Atlanta recently, my gut feeling is that the government of the state of Georgia will probably be, a penny wise and a dollar short by passing it, then ultimately losing out on all of the industry moving away. But I did want to kind of wrap up a little bit here, Paul, with a story about resilience. Tell me about the NASA Voyager 1 spacecraft.
Yeah, I thought this was a really awesome story, not really security related, but essentially in 1977, NASA launched Voyager 1. And for 37 years, they hadn't heard from this spacecraft. And so they got a bunch of engineers together at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and analyzed the assembly code and figured out a way to activate the backup thrusters so that it could turn towards Earth and send communications. And they actually got communications back. I just thought that was really cool. The thrusters were still functional after 37 years without use. So talk about resiliency, right? And the software, they said, was coded in outdated assembler language. And they made sure that they could safely test those thrusters. What I really loved about this article is one of the geekiest terms that I've ever seen in an article, I think. So they say Voyager 1's extended mission is expected to continue until around 2025, when its radioisotope thermal electric generators will no longer supply enough electric power to operate its scientific instruments. That's radioisotope thermal electric generators. I love that. I got to work that into something because I just think that's the coolest term ever.
That is, so you're pulling out your nerd card now. But to that end, yeah, I mean, like a story of resilient development, right? Like, here's the two things that they did, right? Two things that they did that were awesome is they went back and they reviewed the code. And the second thing is they tested to see if it would work before they actually used it in production. Who would have thought, right? Like, genius right there. But at the same time, I just thought that this was a cool story to include because I don't know that anyone builds their code today to be as resilient as this sort of thing. And quite frankly, I feel like there's every opportunity to do so, especially with the modern DevOps processes that we have. So I would encourage everyone to build their own NASA Voyager 1 or at least the equivalent of in their code as they continue
and
to
have
develop.
cool acronyms like TCM, which is Trajectory Correction Maneuver. That's awesome too. I loved all the terminology.
Movies.
Yeah, I loved all the terminology in this article. It was so nerdy. It was awesome.
Yeah, and to that end as well, I wanted to point out just a couple of stories before we wrap up. Story number 7 under Food for Thought is a kind of a longer form story with some really neat graphics around the ideas of running less software, which I thought was kind of interesting. And use what you need, live off the land, as it were. So that was a cool story to check out. Also, Apple's going to be replacing its chips with its own chips in 2020, replacing Intel, which I thought was good. Story number 2 under Food for Thought. Lastly, though, I've left 2 cartoons from probably my favorite webcomic today, which is Commit Strip, stories number 8 and 9. The last one specifically on how full stack development came to be.
It's pretty
so
funny.
With that, thank you everyone for joining us this week for another episode of Application Security Weekly. Remember to git commit and stay classy.